Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Taylor Trask.
And I'm Todd A.
And welcome, everybody, to another episode. It is Sunday night when we're recording because of a number of reasons. I just got back personally from the Hard Cider Fest in Paonia, Colorado. Had a lovely little time. That is a yearly tradition for me. Just got back into town, so we weren't able to record this morning.
What's your hangover level?
Not so bad. The nice thing about this festival is that in addition to a river of cider that never stops, there is some of the best food you will ever have.
Wow.
I like to say that this whole event is like mainlining autumn into your veins, like a drug junkie. Like it's just everything about it is just an assault on the senses.
Is this where you've gotten that like apple whiskey thing?
Yes. The
Oh my
Pommeau.
God.
Yeah. So if you're ever in
God.
Western Colorado, there is this stuff called Pommeau, which the best way to explain it is if you've ever wondered what like an apple cider bourbon would be like, it's this. It's sort of distilled in the same way bourbon or whiskey is, but it is cider, but the proof is very high. It is very much meant to be a sort of like bourbon glass kind of drink. You don't want to just down it. It's hot, and more expensive, but it's delicious.
Yeah, and as I recall, your pitch when you served this to me was it's bourbon, but it's like the smoothest bourbon you've ever had.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure you just served it neat.
Yep, I did. Yeah, that's right.
And I couldn't believe it. Like I was just prepared. Like, man, I'll if it's just a whiskey neat, I'm not going to enjoy it. But this was unbelievable stuff.
And
I trust you got some.
Well, that's high praise because you've spent time in London. You've been a bartender.
Well, but I'm not like a whiskey drinker, by any means. I always have whiskey with like some kind of mixer, like Jameson's and ginger or something like that, but not, not neat.
Got it. How was your weekend? What are you up to?
It was very active. Again, maybe an autumn weekend like you described. It doesn't quite feel that way weather-wise in California, but Halloween party, some monster music, some alcohol.
Wait, did you Halloween party, or is it just more the ambiance that you had going in your homestead?
Oh no, they're at the Halloween party. Drinks and monster music and the Elvira movie and
oh, nice.
Yeah.
I haven't done that for ages.
I still have not actually absorbed it because I saw the first couple of minutes and then I saw the end of it, both subtitled, and was like, what? How did we get here? What happened? So yeah, I may have some. There's been a couple things gestating over the weekend, so I may have some. I'm not like big announcements or something, just like fun new stuff I'm doing in the next couple of weeks, which I will tell you about.
Fantastic.
Sure.
Well, if you're listening to this, we just had an election, Todd, and we're talking to you from the past, so we don't know what happened exactly. I hope it was good for everybody. I hope it's positive.
Oh my gosh.
I hope we're not on a 2-year binge of just accusations and investigations and double talk. And I hope that this podcast is finding you post-election in a state where you're a little less stressed out about things, whoever you may be, wherever you may be in the world. That said, my pick this week is semi-appropriate, I think, given all the recent stress and strife and sort of, disorder along racial lines and xenophobia and just all these kind of things that have been in the news for the past couple years are very much a part of the graphic novel I picked, Todd. And
oh Lord,
yeah, get ready. This. If you are a listener of the show, this is going to tick all my usual boxes. This is an independent book. It is, it's very topical, but very timeless at the same time. This could have easily come out in the 70s. This could probably come out 20 years from now and still be just as relevant. And it is by I think it's a new writer, as far as I can tell, and a fairly new creative team, published by Image. It is a book titled Infidel, written by Pornsic Piachote illustrated by Jose Villarrubia and Aaron Campbell. Came out this year. It originally originally released as a series of single issues, 5 to be specific, and then later collected as a trade paperback. That is out now. The trade came out in September. I bought it digitally, and I'll get into that more as to why in just a minute. But just a fantastic, just fresh take on the old haunted house story. So this is a little, we got a little Halloween in here too, and that's I think I read it for that reason. I read it for both the reasons of Halloween, but also I knew the election was coming, so I kind of wanted something to, remind me of the times in which we're living. And this is definitely one of those books. I'll give you the back of the cover treatment first. It starts off by saying, a haunted house story for the 21st century. Infidel follows an American Muslim woman and her multiracial neighbors who move into a building haunted by entities that feed off xenophobia. Best-selling author or editor he's an editor at first. Pornsec Piachote, who edited Swamp Thing, Day Tripper. Interesting. I never knew that. Day Tripper in the Unwritten makes his comics writing debut alongside artist extraordinaire Aaron Campbell, who did The Shadow, James Bond, Felix Leader, and award-winning colorist and editor Jose Villarrubia. I think that's Villarrubia. Batman Year 100, Spider-Man Reign, etc. And then some letterer and some other folks too. They finish by saying believable horror that's as unsettling as it is beautiful to look at. And then brilliant horror with a terrifying contemporary resonance. This feels way, way too real. That's by quote by Mike Carey, who wrote Lucifer. So a fantastic, fantastic little pick. I would say I'm going to jump to the end and say if you like the movie Get Out, or some of the John Carpenter sort of horror movies of the early 80s, and even something kind of like Hellraiser to some extent, in terms of like the creature design, you're gonna like this. I think the Get Out comparison is the most apt though, because this is as much a horror movie that in a lot of these sorts of stories, the person of color is either the wise friend or the sacrificial lamb, or the wizard who shows them the way. It's never the main character usually. So Get Out, when it came out, really flipped that on its head. It is the nature of the story can only happen to a black person. Same thing with this. The nature of this story can only happen to specifically in this case a Muslim woman, but people of color throughout the book sort of have a stuff happens to them that would not happen to a white person. Let's just say.
So I would say, like in Get Out, I feel like there's one of the special tensions there was that to a white member of the audience, you could read it as like an analogy of racism. Mm-hmm. Like this is a horror movie about like they're using the racial dialogue as like like I said, like an analogy, like a mechanism or something. But I would assume to like a black audience, it's like, no, this is actually real.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a similar mechanic at work in Infidel where you feel the horror more as you put yourself in the Muslim woman's perspective?
Definitely. Whereas Get Out, it's gonna sound weird to say, Get Out could that story theoretically could actually happen in the real world. It's it's kind of a heightened fantasy to some degree, but nothing is out of the realm of possibility. There could be this weird white family who sends their daughter to go get that could happen. That could actually happen. In the case of Infidel, not so much, because it's a haunted, it's kind of a haunting ghost story, demonic possession kind of story. Not, there's a supernatural element that's not at play in Get Out. But to your point, it is, if you think about it, if you just read it from a bog standard white person's point of view, it's a thrilling story. If you put yourself in the shoes of this woman and her friend, which the book does a really good job of giving you that perspective. They really thread that needle really nicely. You feel her pain throughout this whole thing. You feel what it's like to be in her shoes. And I think even more so because when you see some of the horrific stuff that she sees as a result of living in this apartment building, it's unsettling. And I think part of the point was, I want, as from the writer's point of view, I want a non-color, it's a safe audience. It doesn't necessarily have to be a exclusively white audience, but, you could be a person of color living in a very safe sort of upscale neighborhood where you don't have to deal with this kind of stuff necessarily. He wanted everybody to feel the sort of visceral nature of being under attack by xenophobia, by fear, by loathing, all of these things. So the themes in the story really are about, the whole thing is kind of metaphor, but it functions really well as as just a grounded, standard horror, ghost story, horror story. Definitely not for kids. I would never give this to anybody under the age of even 18. I'm sure teens can handle it, but it is a challenging look, to say the least.
Is it because, is there gore, or is it really just totally the subject matter that makes it
both
R-rated?
You need a reader who has the maturity to understand the point made, but it's also, there is some imagery that is, Ring level, where it's just it will stick with you. So if you are, if you're a mind who isn't used to that, like this, get ready, because this is some of the illustrations really, like I said, the Hellraiser comparison. If think about just the outside of Pinhead, the iconic, the main guy, like some of the other, creatures that appear, they're disturbing to look at. Much the same here.
So are they? I mean, sorry to ask a question that leads into spoiler territory, but when it says the building is haunted by entities that feed off xenophobia, is it? Are we meant to believe that or do you know that those are definitely entities?
They are definitely entities.
Okay,
they are threatening and they can kill you.
Okay.
Yeah, it is definitely that. So the book starts off. I don't want to get too much into the naming, the names of people, because there's a lot of names. There's a lot of there's a couple main characters, but there's a lot of sub characters, and I think it's going to get convoluted if I get too far into that rabbit hole. But there is a main. Basically, the story starts off. The primary antagonist is this young Muslim woman. She's married a guy whose previous wife died, and he and his daughter basically bring her in. The daughter has a really great relationship with this woman. She's kind of the stepmom. She didn't know if she was going to do it at first, and it's working out wonderfully. The guy's mom is the first sub character we meet, and it becomes clear that the mom is not really a fan of his son's new wife, and she's not overtly racist, but it's the first kind of example of that. Just that it's almost subconscious in a way. She represents that version of white America that will act very nice and polite, outwardly towards somebody, but still harbor that kind of suspicion and fear. And so it kind of kicks things off where you're immediately thinking, well, is she, what's her stake in all of this? And every new character you meet, you're trying to piece it together in your head, and it always takes a left turn, which is really satisfying, because you think, oh, this is how it's going to go. And immediately something happens that just throws all that out the window. So I love that aspect of it. But this woman, the apartment they moved into, and this gets convoluted too, which is why I'm trying to stay light on detail in terms of names and all that. They move into this apartment complex in New York, and previously a Muslim man lived there who everybody says blew up a bomb and it took out one of the floors. The only reason the apartment's still standing is because it was built when all the floors were concrete and not wood. So that a blast like that could be self-contained essentially, and not and it was weak enough where it didn't take out the main pillars and stuff like that. So the fourth floor, I think it's the fourth floor, is a lot of people died during that blast, but a lot of people who lived in the apartment during that time are still there. So they're highly suspicious of this woman, and this woman, she's, the moment they move in, it's, she's creeped out. You're introduced to this apartment right away, and they do a really great job of building the fact that this is not some place anybody should live, let alone this woman. It's everything about it just seems antagonistic towards her, and just good-hearted people in general. I would not, it's creepy as hell. And right away you're introduced to the entities that live in this place. And they are the embodiment, the personification of racism and hatred and xenophobia. And they are just as dark and twisted in the physical sense. They're manifest as those thoughts and ideas are, which is why it's a great metaphor. It's like you're looking at this going, I am sickened even looking at these things. And if you look at the covers of the book, you get a sense of that. Like the covers do a great job And in fact, it's worth, even though I bought this as a collection and on digital, it would be worth collecting the single issues if you're a horror fan, just because the covers are really well thought out, especially for the story. But I would advise you to look at, if you're like, well, what is he talking about? Like, how creepy are these things? Cover number 3 and cover number 5 really give you the idea of what those things look like. They're pretty accurate. So she's in this haunted apartment. She's the only one who can see these things at first. As the story progresses, you realize other people might be able to see them too, or maybe see glimpses of them. And these things, they aren't just phantoms. They can physically interact in her reality. They can make her do things. They can, they can influence her. They can physically harm her. And you realize that these things are fueled in large part by the fear and anger of the people in this apartment after this bomb went off. But you also realize that this bomb going off could very well have been provoked by these entities as well. So it's not quite clear where they actually start and end in this story. Especially after the book ends, you think they kind of leave it open for more even yet. So it just that I like that. That's it's sort of abstract. It's not like some guy said a magic spell and they're all here. They kind of they do a little bit of Egon explaining. It's like. At one point it was thought that there was a dark dimension straddling our own, and they kind of give it the what's the book in Ghostbusters that they quote a lot? I'm Charles Wefso is going to hate me for not knowing.
I know. I can't believe I can't think of this right now.
It's Token Spirit Guide. There we go. God.
Yes.
Something like so. It's like there's kind of like that, a little of that baked in, just to kind of give it a little bit of sort of examination. But for the most part, I think it is, the entities aren't meant to, they're just, the ideas that they represent are sort of what manifests them.
Well, does the story become about them defeating the entities, or literally just like escaping?
It starts off as the former and turns out the latter. And at some point you meet her really good friend who enters the picture in a major way, and it almost becomes the main character herself for a little while. Every time you think you have any of these characters figured out, you don't. So it's a little disorienting. The only character you really know for sure about is the main Muslim woman that you meet in the beginning. She stays completely consistent, and there's some really touching things between her and her friend, especially at the end, that are just really well done. But the book becomes survive this experience as best you can.
Well, just you describing it and reading that back cover copies, like my brain sort of wants to solve the puzzle of like the analogy versus just the horror motif, or like just the idea that there are entities that feed off xenophobia. So presumably they are strengthened when there is more xenophobia, like, or racism present in the building, is such an awful metaphor, or whatever analog for like our society, that feeling of like,
I'll add you another dimension that'll make it even sicker. They're also strengthened by the fear and weakening of the main character. So as she gets more scared and more paranoid, they get stronger. So it's a double whammy. And it's just like, you think about how the people who try to put these notions into policy or into just their everyday lives, like the strength they get when they win, when they are able to, put some of these terrible things in play, or convince people to follow them into these pursuits. It's like they get more strength off it too. So it is, I'm so glad you picked up on that, because it is unsettling in that way.
Yeah.
And it just makes you, people like you and I, and most people, I shouldn't put us in some special group. Most people, you will want to root for the main character even more because of it.
Yeah.
You want her to do something badass and vanquish these things. And I don't want to spoil anything in that regard, but like you wait a while. Yeah. You keep kind of waiting, thinking, oh my God, what is this? How is this going to end? Like your hope kind of gets dashed for a little bit here and there. And it's, that makes it more gripping too. Every time I kind of thought I had this book figured out and I was like, okay, well, this was good, but I know where they're going. I'm just going to kind of fast forward through. Every time I got to that point, they shift it again. They take another left turn. So they really, I mean, and I would not know. This is kind of like last week or last episode I did. I would not want to consume this as single issues.
In that, like, you wouldn't want to wait a month between.
No, and they did come out a month. I mean, fortunately, it finished in a single run. It's not like they waited for after issue 3 and they're like, we'll be back in 6 months. Yeah, as is sometimes the case. No, that would be so disjointed. It would literally be like watching Get Out in small chunks. It's just like you can't do it. Like every time in Get Out, every time she hypnotizes them, imagine if their credits just start rolling right after that.
Yeah, next time on Get Out.
It's just you need to keep that. You need to be invested in the story start to finish in one sitting. Especially like, again, this was a great Halloween pick, but man, it really wires my head to think about the election before and then after when this airs after. It's when you meet people like this, or you hear people like who of all colors, there's at one point later on in the book, there is an Asian woman who lives in the apartment with her husband, and she's even distrustful of our main character and her friend. Like, so you get to see, it's not just, this is in no way, shape or form a shame on you white people book. That's not the point. This is, there are some of us out here who have gone through this. We want you all to understand what this feels like. Because I don't think, even the people who are sympathetic to folks in this, people who are oppressed or people who experience racist, sort of antagonism, those of us who are sympathetic, it still is not enough for us to feel what it's like. And I think this book really goes to that extent and draws you into that psychology, which I'm very appreciative of. The more I can kind of get that through other mediums, that just makes me, I feel like I'm closer now than I was before.
Yeah. Maybe heightens your compassion or empathy for those situations or something, because I feel more.
I don't feel like it's so because it's you almost kind of feel fake after a while, but you're like I'm not you, so I'll never understand what it's truly like. This gets me. I'm never going to say I know now what I'll never jump to that conclusion, but I feel a little more comfortable in my empathy, because it's like, okay, I have a better baseline now to make this feeling matter more.
Well, there's something so scary about the other thing that like I'm as I'm listening to you talk about it, and I'm staring at this cover of the trade paperback, which by the way is terrifying.
And that cover again perfectly sums up. Yeah. If you look at that cover, that is the book. It's not all in red. I'll talk about the illustration in a second, but go on. Sorry.
But it's such he has made a real horror story out of the advice, don't feed the trolls.
Yes.
And it's like, and it's a thing we can't avoid, but it's that, like, any of those like racist feelings towards neighbors or that xenophobia, like no matter whom it's coming from, it's not necessarily about the power structure, it's about the individuals mistrusting each other and how that feeds the literal like demons in this book. That's a really terrifying concept.
A couple times they do this wonderful thing where the metaphor goes even a step deeper. Like, the demons will influence the main character to do something she didn't mean to do. Or they'll influence the event in a way, and then somebody's watching, and because she can see these demons but nobody else can, somebody will misinterpret something she did and then and have even a more negative impression of her. And it's like, no, you don't understand what's going on. So it really bears multiple readings.
Wow.
But I think just this is more than, I want to be really careful and say, like, this is not like an SJW book. This is not like a social activism book. It incorporates a lot of the things that those people care about, but this is not one of those. This is a horror story through and through. It just happens to be about these things and incorporates those themes really, really well, but not it's not heavy-handed. I didn't find it heavy-handed. It's very organic. How it incorporates those themes is very organic to the story and the characters that it sets up. And so it's just brilliant in that sensibility. Do you want to talk real quick about the art?
Yeah, I was just about to pivot you to that.
Excellent. Art is very monochromatic. They pick, maybe 2 or 3 colors for each particular palette, or page, kind of page setup. What they do right out of the gate is tease this idea of a nightmare. So it starts off and you think she's having a, at first you think she's having a nightmare. Later on, you may rethink that. But the color palette they use for her nightmare is, like browns, kind of a pale purple and a pale orange and black. So it's kind of a very specific thing. When she's awake, the color palette is still muted, but it's like, blues and maybe some greens and a lighter kind of sort of vibe. As the story progresses and she gets sucked further and further into that nightmare, what is considered quote unquote the real world's color will change to be what we saw in those first palettes. So it's almost like a color overture. The first couple pages kind of introduce those themes, and if you pay attention, they'll come back again in an interesting way. So I really dig that. The actual illustrations, very deliberately pen and pencil. So it has that sort of rough journalistic kind of quality to it. Not digital. And that's good too, because when they get to the entities almost have sort of a charcoal drawing, kind of different. Like he drew them very differently. So they have the otherworldly aspect to them is, makes them even more unsettling, because you're used to this slightly more simplistic pen drawing to introduce the main kind of the real world, the main characters, the normal world. So yeah, I can't embrace this enough. It had been on my list for a little while, and the fact that Image put it out always gives. Just think about that for a second too. Think about, a lot of people loved the early Image, but it was very much meant to be, it was of its time. The early 90s was very exaggerated, very, the early 90s in comics was very similar to the hair band era, hair metal era of the late 80s. It's just kind of like just extreme everything. You might have a good Def Leppard song here and there, but it's not, artistically, I don't think, wasn't going for, really meaty issues. And just to see what Image is doing now, even after 5 years of amazing releases, just to see them continuing to up the stakes and up the creative ante and just tell deeper, more interesting stories. God damn, like it's, if you would have gone back in time and shown someone this book within the first 5 years of Image, they think you're insane. There's no way they're going to, A, who the hell published this at all? B, certainly wasn't Image. And here we are.
Yeah. It also sounds like that perfect mix of, just from a comic book standpoint, of certainly what I like, but I think you like as well, which is feeling like you can get this one arc and it is wrapped up. But if the creative team wanted to take this further, they probably could.
I will say on that, I'm glad you brought that up. This has been optioned for a movie. So,
oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and they actually, and believe it or not, was optioned before the run was even done. I think after issue 3, somebody snatched it up. And
well, there's that sticker on the front that says selected for NPR's 100 favorite horror stories of all time.
That's pretty high praise too.
I'm sure everybody has a list like that, but of all time is
yeah. I wouldn't be surprised, on that same note, I wouldn't be surprised if this makes a lot of those 50 essential graphic novels for like all of those kinds of lists. I'm sure this is going to be, because it nails the topical stuff so well. So of course, but I think just as people come to appreciate how well they wrap that metaphor around just good organic storytelling. Again, it's not like at any time somebody gets up and reads a speech about like, woe is us Muslims. It's never that. It is just purely a visceral horror story that just happens to be about this stuff. Much, again, just like Get Out. You can't, there was nothing in my opinion, heavy-handed about Get Out. It just happened to nail that metaphor really, really, really well.
Yeah. And which makes it all so much scarier to find the terror in reality. And that thing of like, one audience can read this as an analogy, but another audience sees it as a real life possible happenstance, is like, or possibilities is just, oh man, just awful.
That brings us full circle. I mean, that's kind of how we started. That bookend. That does it for this book. Todd, where can folks find us?
Well, you can find us anywhere that great podcasts are listened to. So iTunes and Google Podcast and Google Play and Stitcher and Podbean. I don't know. Any major podcasting outlet, just search for Panelism and we are there. You can also find us online at panelism.inc. That's correct. That is a new top level domain that we have. And we're on Instagram as panelism.inc. And that's INK, like what's used to color comic books.
That's great. And have a lot easier to remember than there.org and all of those.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Taylor, that was an awesome pick.
Thanks, sir.
Perfectly appropriate for the season of Halloween and also politics. Ugh, election day.
Well, thank you, sir. We'll talk to you next time.